Josephus, liar, lunatic, or legend. The character Josephus is a central figure in the Jewish revolt and is the archetypical, riddle wrapped up in an enigma, mysterious person. It is through Josephus himself that we learn of his background and life story, and the entire sequence of events leading up to, during, and in the aftermath of the big Jewish revolt which occurred between 67 and 73 or 74 CE. He is supposed to have been born in 37 CE into one of Jerusalem's leading families, the second son of a priest named Matthias and a woman who was said to be descended from the famous Jonathan Athos of the Hasmonean dynasty. Paternally, he is connected to the Jehoiarib order of priests, which was made the first of the 24 priestly divisions under King David's decrees. Josephus is said to have received a first-class education, been a child prodigy at the age of 14, and argued with the temple elders. Note the similarities with the story of Jesus in Luke.
Every year Jesus' parents would go to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When he was 12 years old, they went as usual. When the festival was over, they left for home. The boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents didn't know it. They thought that he was with the others who were traveling with them. After traveling for a day, they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they didn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. 3 days later, they found him in the temple courtyard. He was sitting among the teachers, listening to them, and asking them questions. His understanding and his answers stunned everyone who heard him. Luke 2 verses 41 to 47.
As historian Dr. Henry Abramson has pointed out, however, scholarly analyses of Josephus's works show many mistakes in basic halakha, the Jewish religious laws. Why wouldn't a prominent Jew with a first-class education be fully aware of Jewish religious laws? The story around Josephus's prodigious nature demands circumspection, firstly for being implausible, and secondly for their remarkable similarity to biblical accounts of Jesus arguing with temple elders. As a young man, Josephus claims he was sent to Rome as some sort of emissary, to secure the release of some Jewish priests from Emperor Nero. He would return to Judea at the onset of the Jewish revolt, and was made military commander of the Jewish forces at Jodfat. Whilst having some initial military success, he eventually ended up being surrounded by Roman forces, trapped in a cave, with a group of 40 Jewish militia. And it is here we hear of a death pact that he concocted, whereby they would draw lots and kill each other, until the remaining person committed suicide, rather than surrender to the Romans. But as it happens, as this death pact played out, Josephus was one of 2 remaining men, and they both broke the pact by surrendering to the Romans. The siege of Jodfat in 67 CE and ensuing suicide or death pact bears incredible resemblance to Josephus's account of the siege of Masada in 73 or 74 CE, the last Jewish stronghold of the Jewish revolt. Here, the Sicarii, a violent faction of Jewish rebels, whose aim was to remove Romans from their territory altogether, committed mass suicide, rather than be taken prisoner by Roman forces. In fact, the curious story of this death pact has given rise to a mathematical puzzle coined the Josephus problem. Back to Josephus himself. After his capture, we are told he was taken to see Vespasian, the great Roman commander. Apparently, Josephus told Vespasian that he'd one day become emperor. And according to his story, he was released in 69 CE, the same year that Vespasian became emperor. He became a close aide and confidant of the Flavians, and lived out the rest of his life in relative luxury in Roman elite circles. It is notable that, according to history, the famous Jewish first-century sage, Yohanan ben Zakkai, was also captured, and also had a meeting with Vespasian, and he too prophesied that one day Vespasian would become emperor, and he too is spared. The idea that an enemy general is captured makes a startling prophecy that is fulfilled, and ends up becoming confidant, chief scribe, and historian to his captors, is itself an extremely rare, if not unheard of event, in the history of warfare. But the idea that 2 prominent people independently made the exact same prophecy, and were spared when it came true, seems the stuff of imaginative storytelling. Moreover, readers should know that Josephus is involved in a similar shipwreck situation as Paul of Tarsus, the Paul of biblical fame. Biblical scholar Robert News notes many similarities between Josephus's own and New Testament accounts.
1. A Roman procurator, Felix, is involved in both accounts. 2. Jewish religious leaders are also involved in both accounts. 3. Felix causes Jewish religious leaders to be imprisoned. 4. Felix's actions also result in prisoners going to Rome. 5. The Jewish religious leaders are unjustly accused. 6. Journey to Rome is by ship. 7. The sea journey to Rome seeks to effect justice at the imperial level, to undo injustice done at the provincial level. 8. The ship sinks. 9. The heroes, Josephus or Paul, act with courage and provide leadership. 10. Both heroes pass through Puteoli.
What then are we to make of this character, Josephus? Is he a real person or a mere literary character? We note many implausible details of his life, his prodigious nature at an early age, arguing with temple elders as Jesus did, claims of royal and priestly heritage, but no evidence thereof, being conferred with an unlikely military position, a dubious suicide pact, a dubious shipwreck, similar to that of Paul, a suspicious prophecy echoed by yet another allegedly historical character, a Jewish sage. This does not sound like a real person at all. Rather, it feels like someone, the Romans, made up the character to somehow give more weight to the biblical narrative and, as Joseph Atwill, author of Caesar's Messiah, has noted, give credence to the idea that Jesus had predicted the Son of Man in the form of Titus Flavius. This supports the idea that the New Testament was created to retrain the Jews to become more docile, more pacifist, and accepting of Roman rule. It seems like whoever was behind the Josephus character had a hand in creating the Gospels, if not other parts of the New Testament, and Josephus's story itself, which subtly realizes the prophecies of the New Testament. It seems the Romans were smart enough, having created the Jesus narrative, to invent additional characters to provide supporting evidence and quell skepticism. And given that practically all we know of the Jewish revolt comes from Josephus, it is pertinent to question if even his accounts of that war are accurate and truthful. In any case, in the aftermath of the war, any Jews who came across his work could relatively easily recall if his accounts corresponded to events that they had heard of from other sources or seen for themselves. It would have been much more difficult for those Jews to verify biblical claims relating to events that purportedly had happened 40 years earlier, like a crucifixion. Nonetheless, after the revolt, the Jews were eventually banned from Jerusalem, defeated and downtrodden. Perhaps the real authors of the Josephus accounts felt confident enough to exaggerate details, in the knowledge that a beaten and dejected Jewish population would not then be invigorated enough to challenge them. Archaeological research suggests that Josephus's accounts of both sieges at Jodfat and Masada exaggerate the sizes of the militaries and casualties, an indication that Josephus's accounts might not be entirely true. The purpose of the Josephus character thus becomes clear. If the Romans wanted the Jews to believe their version of events, then they would need to create someone whom the Jews could relate to. They'd be unlikely to believe a Roman. Of course, the nature of Josephus's escape at Jodfat, his subsequent disloyalty to his forebearers, and his lack of courage, would all give them pause, but perhaps the Romans felt that a person, one of the Jews' own kinfolk, albeit full of flaws, came across as more realistic than a dashing hero untarnished by cowardice. Josephus's accounts of the courage shown by the Jews in defending Jerusalem and Masada would also help them take on board some of his wilder claims. In summary, the fact that Josephus's life story contains elements not only from the life of Jesus, but also from the life of Paul, suggests that a common author or authors were used to write both biblical and non-biblical narratives. If that's the case, then the true extent of Roman fabrication and invention would far exceed the current historical consensus. None of this should surprise us in the least. The Romans had an empire to manage and grow. There's no point having subjects of an empire who don't contribute by paying taxes or by providing other tributes or labor, and who are rebellious and violent. And the historical record shows that the Jews and the Romans were continuously at loggerheads over the paying of taxes and the forced imposition of foreign deities at Jewish religious sites. Religious propaganda is a very efficient and perhaps effective way of controlling people without spending a huge amount of resources. It costs a lot less to pay a few authors to write some fancy stories than commit to sending huge armies into battle against rebellious subjects. To conclude, in answer to the question, was Josephus a liar, a lunatic, or legend, our response must be that he was a legend. In other words, a fictional, mythical character, dreamt up to bolster the gospel stories and the New Testament in general, and to disseminate the deliberate narrative that the Romans wanted to circulate about the Jewish revolt. Thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this video.